All right, so our guest today is Melissa Sevy. She is co-founder of Fairkind. This is a humanitarian organization who has the goal of breaking the cycle of poverty by providing fair trade jobs in developing countries. She is also the founder of and executive director of Musana International, which is a humanitarian organization with the mission of empowering women and providing opportunities for their children. She's also she's brought her mother here today. Grandmother. I'm sorry. Her grandmother is here today, Gay Matheson. So be sure to say hi to Gay before you leave today. So Melissa is a graduate of the BY, and she has a certificate from University of Pennsylvania. We are super happy to have with us today Melissa Sevy.
Okay, I think this is on.
It's on.
Okay. Hi, well, it's really fun to come here. So my 86-year-old grandmother came here when it was BAC, the Branch Agricultural College. And then my parents met here. I grew up in St. George, so whenever we're driving through Cedar, they always look at each other and wink at each other because so many memories. So this is really fun to be here today. So I feel like I would do you a disservice if I made kind of the yellow brick road presentation that makes it look like, and now we're here and it's amazing. I really hope to show you, and I'd love for you to ask ask the hard questions. We'll hopefully have time at the end for questions about this journey, because it's definitely been a journey, and I'll kind of take you through that. So just when I set off, and are you familiar with the term social entrepreneurship? Is anybody familiar with that term? It's not just creating Facebook or social media. It's not that. But the kind of the combination of doing business with a social mission to improve society. And every business can be that. And I think that's a really great kind of a new mentality. Traditionally, people just thought you can just if you want to do social good, you've got to work for a nonprofit or government. But that's not the case anymore. The lines are blurring between these. And I will hopefully make the case that we can do a lot of good through business and scalable, sustainable good. So as I set out on starting on entrepreneurship, I figured it would be this just rosy road, but what it's been more like multiple times is literally feeling like the road fell out in front of me and not sure where to go next. Is it working? Oh, look, magic. Okay. So I, just in brief, I studied special education in my undergrad, and then I did a master's in public health. And after I graduated, just a couple days after I graduated with my master's, headed out to Uganda. So there's an organization based in Provo called Help International, and I was running their volunteer program there for the summer. So I got to know many of the women in the community and started seeing some common situations. This is a woman named Eve. She was a single mother. She engaged in sporadic pickup work, so her work every day was figuring out what she could do that day, whether it was washing clothes or cleaning for someone or selling something, to provide the one meal for her children that night. Her children were in poor health. She didn't have access to health care. She had no money for school fees, and in a lot of developing societies, school is not free, and so her kids were not in school, and at the time she was living in her pastor's garage. So unfortunately, this is not an atypical situation for a woman in the developing world. And so we see this pattern of very often there's a lot of single mothers, and so women have the economic burden for the home, and yet there's very little work for women. There's not a lot of jobs in agriculture-based societies. And so this very naturally leads to a generational poverty cycle. So as we looked at that situation, And then started thinking about what's the situation for women in the Western world. So we're seeing this rise in ethical consumerism, and that's your generation, is saying like, where were my clothes made? How are they made? What's the environmental impact, et cetera. People are looking for unique fashion, not just, conveyor belt stuff. And then more than any time in the world's history, we're more connected to what's happening in the world around us. And we know the problems that are happening, and we want to contribute to those. So this desire for meaningful contribution is the hallmark of your generation, which is very cool. And so thinking of these two situations next to each other, we came up with a solution in jewelry. So the way our program works is our artisans, women are trained and employed in handcrafting the jewelry that's sold here in the US. Profits return to provide stable income, and that's like the core of our program, is providing jobs. We really, our brand of poverty alleviation is if people have steady and fair work, they'll be able to solve so many of their other problems associated with poverty. But in addition, we do classes in literacy and English to kind of get them into being able to have a bank account and being able to not get cheated in the marketplace, health and entrepreneurship. So from the beginning, we had this as part of our model, that artisans, and this was our assumptions going into it, is that artisans could be in our program for a couple of years, have some stability, and then start their own businesses, which we could provide like microloans for, and then they can kind of graduate and leave space for others to come into the program. I'll kind of take you through this. Our assumptions were a little naive for this being just this easy 2-year program. But this is the model that we started with, and we've continued. It's just gone differently than we expected, as any business would. So this organization is a 501c3 nonprofit charity called Musana, which means sunlight in the local language. And so looking at our impacts, after a couple years of being in business, we saw some really significant things change with our artisans. The confidence level of many of our artisans remarkably improved English and literacy. So when I had come back 2 years later, women that I couldn't even converse with, we could have full conversations with. Their children were in school. They had kind of social markers, such as assets like having a cell phone where they can be connected, and better housing. However, problems that remained is that despite making 2 and 3 times what they were making before, we saw that they had no savings. So they were in no more stable of a place if some tragedy happened, which happens in a more frequency in a developing context. And then they were, again, having more money but not spending it on health, so that we weren't seeing market improvements in their health, poor nutrition, sanitation, and health. So some solutions. We built out our entrepreneurship program. And so what I was kind of alluding to, assuming that everybody's an entrepreneur, you're an entrepreneur. You are entrepreneurs here in this class, that you've got this affinity for it. But assuming that everybody's an entrepreneur is just a false assumption, and that everybody would want to do that. And also assuming that after 2 years they'd be ready to jump into the instability of being an entrepreneur after having stability for the first time in their lives. And so we've made it just more of a flexible program that as they come up with ideas, and what's really cool is that there's a direct correlation with as they kind of gain this confidence, they gain literacy and start to be able to feel confident in their life, their creativity skyrockets. So I really have seen that poverty inhibits creativity, but when someone can be given those opportunities, they can really blossom. So several of them have started group businesses, and they've been really low risk things like these two women got together and are renting out land where they can grow crops and sell them to the marketplace. And it's more side income while they have the stability of working with us. Our English and literacy classes, we focus on functional literacy, not like kids' books, but like things they can use in the marketplace, at the bank, et cetera. And then we do interactive health lessons. Our women go out and train other women's groups in the area on health. And then we have a medical benefits program. So again, it's really fun that we can provide health care, and it's like, which is not common there, but that we can say, hey, this is a benefit for working for us. You earned this. This is not like a free handout. This is tied to your good work. And so that's a lot more of a dignifying program. So we started with 7 artisans in 2009, and 2019, especially during 2018, we were able to employ over 300 women, which was really exciting. And they're supporting over 1,000 children. And so really what we're working on is making this a generational change. Providing opportunities so that they can pass that on to their children. So just to give you some stories of like the touchy-feely stuff before I jump into some of the trickier business stuff. So Eve is the woman I mentioned in the beginning. It was living in her pastor's garage. In 2009, when I was first there, she was very shy, would hardly look you in the eye, and she didn't speak any English, so she would actually come and wash clothes for our group. We were like 20 college students. She'd come wash clothes for us, and I didn't get to interact with her a lot to get to know her personality. So 2 years later, when I came back, she was like a different person. She is like now considered the class clown of Musana. She is just this sassy, sarcastic, and like sarcasm is not common in Uganda, so I do not know her. But she's the first one when visitors come to our workshop, she'll jump up on her feet and say, "We are happy to receive you, welcome." And she like loves singing for people and teasing everybody. And that was really amazing to see. And that's an impact that's difficult to measure, but for sure is something you can see. And so I had returned back in 2012, and we were building out the program. And we had brought on a new artisan, Sissy. And so this was the fall of 2012. Sissy was, so she's a new kid on the block. So as was customary, all the artisans would sit in a circle and introduce themselves to each other. And when it got to her, she started crying. And she was speaking in the local language, so I didn't know exactly what she was saying. But I was sitting next to Eve, and I turned to Eve and asked her, what's she talking about? And she turned back to me and said, she's talking about how difficult life has been. Her husband left her with 2 kids. To make ends meet, her job for the last few years had been carrying large vats of water for 8 hours a day to and from a business to the well. And so just really backbreaking labor. And in a very reflective tone, Eve turned to me and she said, I remember feeling like that. And then she went over and said something and says, I don't know why I'm getting emotional. It must be you guys, because I've told this story a lot of times before. She went over and said something to Sissy, and when she came back, I asked her what she said, and in essence, she said, girl, you have no reason to cry anymore. You're with us. You're going to be just fine. And that was this really beautiful full circle moment that kind of, that's been our driving force to keep this going. So you look at this and you're like, yeah, this is so great. Like this is, and again, this is why I want to tell, I'm going to backtrack a little bit. Because it can look like this and this is 10 years later, people are like, oh man, I want your job. That looks so cool. And I'm like, well, let me tell you about what it was really like. So Whereas our Uganda program was thriving, we were sending all of our money over to Uganda. And this is where you as entrepreneurship students can not make this mistake from the beginning. I had never taken a business class, and in both undergrad and grad school. So this was like, I was just like shooting from the hip for several years. So for the first few years, as Musana was running, and I didn't really explain this, we would sell our jewelry just online for the most part. So we had a website, and then we'd get into some boutiques. We sometimes did like, booths and different things, but never was able to make ends meet with that. And I mean, surprisingly, kind of this ethical fashion space is a little crowded, and it takes some capital and some really big smarts to invest and be able to break into the market. And actually I think this was 2014 or something, maybe 2015, we randomly got a Facebook message from someone, and we're like, is this a hoax? From someone that said, I'm working with so-and-so who's going to do a piece on the Today Show on ethical gifting for Christmas, and we'd like to show your pieces. And we're like, so we just sent them our pieces, and they were shown on the Today Show, and our sales in the week after that piece was more than the entire year combined. Yeah, but it flattened back out. It actually did not sustain. And so we were just like, it was a lot more tricky. From the beginning, we were like, well, and actually people asked me like, why jewelry? And we were like, what's the activity coming up is due diligence. Oh yeah, and axe throwing, yes. Axe throwing, jewelry, yes. Just kidding. So due diligence, that is something, we did the due diligence on the problem, like the social problem we were solving, but not on the market problem that we were solving. So did we know if there was a space for ethical jewelry? No. We had not researched that or really delved into the market. So all of this, and again, I hope to show you, all of this was us just kind of making assumptions like, we'll just bring that jewelry over and people will buy it. And that was like our plan. So for the first several years, so I came back after we initially started Musana, came back and had a full-time job. So this was just this side gig at nights. I'd work on it from 8 p.m. to midnight. But after a couple years, I went back to Uganda and stayed there for 8 months and really built out the program, but came back to our same problem of the market just wasn't there. We weren't able to tap into that market. So during for several years, these are some of my side hustles that I did to keep this thing going. I did therapy for kids with disabilities, like autism therapy. I was doing that these are all simultaneous to Musana. I taught dance to little girls. I ran dogs, for money. And I love running dogs, but when you're doing it for money and when you have to run 2 and 3 dogs a day, I was like, I hate this, but I did it. I freaking gave plasma when I was 28. And you can give plasma when you're a college student, that's fine. But when you're 28 with a master's degree, I would go at 6 a.m. and hoping that I wouldn't see anybody that I knew because it was really embarrassing. So that's just part of my story, but it sucked. I taught adjunct BYU and UVU, so I've been up in Provo. And at one point I was desperate for grocery money. And so I sold my sewing machine to my parents. And it was so sad, but don't worry, I have a new sewing machine now, as of the last year. So all this to show what's going on to make this work. So we started thinking bigger about this problem and started getting smarter. I mean, one really great phrase that we hear in entrepreneurship is fail fast and fail often. This was this slow, drawn out death. And failing doesn't mean your business fails, but it's testing out ways to make your business work, and let them fail fast and try, and then pivot to something new. So we started thinking bigger about this problem. This is just 3 years ago. We started thinking, okay, we've really got to know the plight of artisans in Uganda, but started thinking about thinking bigger. So some interesting things. Arts and craft is the second largest employer of people in the developing world, second only to agriculture. So we're talking about, and there's no way to really track how many there are, but 500 plus million artisans, and anybody that's traveled, outside of the US, you go to a country and you see a lot of indigenous handcraft that's beautiful and, has been passed down. So really highly skilled craftspeople, but very often they lack market access, whether that's, to tourist places within their own country, if there is a tourist industry, or being able to export outside of their country, not having those connections. Very often they're sorely underpaid by middlemen and exporters who will just nickel and dime them down, and then all the value add goes to the middleman. And that's a tragedy. And then just this cycle of being indebted for raw materials that they just never get ahead. They're like, they buy the straw that they make the basket out of and then sell it back for barely more than what they bought the straw for, even though they've added all of that value. So some interesting problems that we see in the US is that companies, and again, as I said before, this is driven by your generation, companies are motivated both internally and externally to do good, to be a do-good company. And a lot of that is driven by millennial Gen, what? What's the next generation? Are you guys Gen Z? No, Gen Z. You're Z. You're Z? Yes. Hey. Is driving, saying, I can take a pay cut to work for a company I feel good about, to work for a company that's like doing good in the world. Statistically, we're seeing that. And so companies know, and that's a big part of retaining employees, keeping employees happy, which makes them productive. And so we're seeing that, but so often they don't have expertise or resources to do that. So they know they should be doing it, not sure how to do it. So seeing that, we turn these problems into a solution by bridging artisans with the corporate world. And so our mission and this is our company, this is a for-profit company, LLC. Our mission is to build the capacity of artisan groups around the world by facilitating their entrance into the global market. And so we connect artisan groups with companies for companies' corporate gifting and ethical sourcing for them. And so that plays out in gifting to their employees for Christmas, partners, et cetera. Because everything's handmade, it can be branded with their logo or in their their colors. And then in addition to being a really cool product that's much less, and we've done some swag, so it's kind of higher end swag. And people are not going to throw that away. When it's handmade, and all of our products come with a card that shows a picture of of the artisans that made it, and kind of tells about the impact. And so people are like getting the touchy-feelies while they're getting this gift, and that just like builds a reputation for that company, to their employees, to their customers. And so we're actually adding a lot of value to a company. So there's this even exchange of value, like they want to make orders with us, and they're looking for something unique to gift. And then in addition, we do ethical sourcing. So we connect them to artisan groups, which is, something that a typical business is not sure how to connect in the developing world. So we do all the quality control and the shipping, and then and for them to resell those products. And I'll show you an example of that. So we look for artisan groups that are in developing economies that already have a high quality craft. Whereas in Uganda, we started from scratch. Like the women that worked for us were not artisans. We work with artisans that are already developed because there's so many of them, but then that are lacking market access. So these are a few of the countries we're working in. We're working in about 10 countries right now. So this shows some of the products. So jewelry is a little more difficult to gift, knowing what someone's fashion preferences are, et cetera. But looking at more functional things, notebooks, baskets, gift baskets that are handmade in Rwanda. Guatemala, we've worked with this really cool group that does leather, so they can do wallets and like laptop cases. And so really functional stuff. So that's like, people are already gifting that. And it's something, our message to companies is you can, you already have a budget for gifting and a need to do it. You can, by gifting through us, you don't have to donate anything, but you're doing a social good and fulfilling a need you already have. And so that's kind of a compelling thing we can tell people about. So we're working with artisans in these countries. And so Fairkind is like the umbrella company that sources from these groups that are like Musana in Uganda. And so it is this for-profit, nonprofit fusion where our for-profit buys from our nonprofit, buys the product and finds these big orders, buys it from the nonprofit. And then connects with all these groups in different places. So we've moved from, let's see if the laser works. Yes. So we were a nonprofit with earned income, which if anybody is looking to go into nonprofit now that I scathed the industry, I can make fun of nonprofits because I run one, so I like doing it. But like traditional nonprofits are just functioning off of grants and donations. That's almost becoming obsolete. Nonprofits are really finding they've got to have some sort of earned income for that. Traditional funding sources are changing. Millennials that are, bumping into their 30s and 40s that are starting to make money are like, what are you doing with this money? And how is this impacting? And they're asking for a lot more accountability. So anyways, the landscape is changing where we're moving this direction. So we're somewhere between this hybrid but because we have a nonprofit for-profit, but our for-profit is a for-profit with social impact. So we've kind of moved across this whole scale of doing good through business. So this is what we worked on last year. So we pitched to this little company called doTERRA that you may have heard of. So they do essential oils, and we've actually worked with them now 3 years in a row. So they're our biggest partner. This past year, we did our biggest collaboration with them. We pitched to them to do these bracelets made in Uganda. So this is made by our nonprofit. So the bracelets have like really cool hand-shaped clay beads that are sourced there, and these gray beads are seeds that grow on bushes in the swamps. But then they have two lava beads on them. So you put oil on the lava beads, and it's an oil diffuser. See what we did there? And so they ended up ordering 107,000 bracelets. So this is why I know. And the logistics of this were bonkers. I was there 3 different times last year, got malaria at one point, was hospitalized for a few days here. It was good times. But these, especially the gray seeds, they grow on bushes and throughout the villages of Uganda. So we had people out all over the country bringing us like big bags of them. And at one point we depleted all of the gray seeds in Uganda. So we had to go to Kenya next door to source them. And if you can imagine 107,000 bracelets, it's like mountains of product. So it was really crazy, but we pulled it off. And it was able to, in addition to giving fair pay to 300 women, the nonprofit made a cut, and so has savings for the first time. And then our for-profit, we made money. We were able to pay back our debts from the previous year when we had an order go wrong. We had a huge order from Morocco. We worked with artisans that made vases. We had an order of 30,000 vases, and the order got way behind. We had never worked in a predominantly Muslim country, and so did not understand all of the holidays, such as Ramadan, where productivity just is not the same. And so people are working about half days. And so we were not hitting our marks. So we had to like spend way more money on the order. And then instead of shipping by boat, we had to ship by air and we had to pay for that. So anyways, so these are just some of the like fun tricks, but that was for doTERRA also. And they saw that we bent over backwards to make their order work, and we did. And we made it happen. It got to them in time. And so this next year, their order like almost quadrupled in size, and we were able to pay back those debts, make some good money. And so it's working, and we've built this relationship. And just as a side note, I mean, as much as you can do with like cool marketing and whatever, especially in B2B, business to business work, it is built on relationships. But you can take that down to the individual customer as well. Relationships, like I have just found that so keenly. And getting warm introductions for these big orders has been everything. So relationships, it all is. And with your individual customer, what kind of relationship are you, creating with them, whatever that looks like. It's about relationships. So these are our models for scale. So 2016, 2017, we really worked on corporate client acquisition. We built out our wholesale landing page. We really focused on Christmas employee partner gifting, limited time offer resell. So that's like what we did with doTERRA, where they resell it. We're still working on this. We've been in talks for like 2 years with Home Shopping Network, where they do like QVC. They like show products on TV. Do you know you have to like actually call on the phone to order, which shows the demographic that they're going for. But you can just sell stuff, like a huge amount of items that are kind of, our stuff is in that space. So this past year, we've really been working on scale. So building a brand, whereas at first we were totally focused on white labeling everything. So we white label it as in we brand it for the company. We're starting to build out a brand. We have an Instagram, it's really beautiful. My partner is really great at that. And we've been building out targeted email campaigns, which is a really interesting thing to work through. So we were able to build lists through LinkedIn, so some plugins to LinkedIn where you can search for different job titles. So we've figured out, event managers, they order stuff for their events. They order swag or nice gifts. We look at companies that are doing global trips. So like last year we had a company that did like an incentive trip to Cancun, and we, for their gifting, we worked with artisans in Oaxaca, Mexico, who had just experienced the huge earthquake like a few months before that, and we're like rebuilding everything, if you remember that huge earthquake. So they made these duffel bags that are really high quality leather and woven, and they were able to weave the company's logo into the weave, and it didn't look hokey. It was kind of like camouflaged into the traditional weave. It looked beautiful. They did such a great job. Looking at companies that are doing global trips, that we can source products from the country that they're visiting and have that, ethical connection. So these targeted email campaigns we'll build out these different lists and then customize the email campaign to them. So a drip email that we, initially send them, this is what we're about. And then hey, are you the right person to, the second email will be are you the right person to ask? And then, so we've done a lot of A/B testing to see which emails people will open and stuff. So that's been really fun. Future, we're looking to get into retail as e-commerce retail. So yes, we weren't able to break into the market before, but we are now that we've started building out this brand, we get people asking us all the time, can I buy one? And we're if you want to buy at least 20, which you don't. So we're looking into doing that, getting into home decor so we can get into a place like West Elm. So again, we can source for them these beautiful products. Anthropology, getting into these department stores, so getting these large orders. So we're working on some relationships with brokers that can get us into those places. So those are some of the things we're looking to do. So just as a story to wrap up, one more story that just talks about why we do what we do. So we had brought on a new group of artisans, and for the first time they were getting a paycheck. So, again, before this they'd just been doing like random pickup work. So they'd been working for 2 weeks. So we had cash that was in envelopes with their name on it. You can see her holding it up here. So we were giving out their envelopes, and they just started cheering, and they were just like hooping and hollering, and they started chanting something together. And I asked one of our artisans, in the local language, they were chanting this, and I asked her what they were saying. And I think that this phrase is really indicative of why they do what they do. They said, "Today our children will drink milk." And that was a really poignant moment. So, okay, that's who we are. This is myself and my business partner, Lyndon. And yeah, would love to hear your questions. We have about 10 minutes. Any questions? Okay. So, yeah, any questions? Yeah.
Did you say most of them are single moms?
Yes. Yeah, so that's just like a lot. I think that goes hand in hand with poverty. There's a lot of just difficult community dynamics that make for a lot of single moms. Yeah.
Considering the hardships that these people go through, do you ever have trouble in reaching out to people where they fully trust you or your organization?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. If you didn't hear that, them trusting us, etc. So how we've built it out that it is like we work on contracts. So we will, and again, we're working with sometimes groups that have lower literacy levels, but in each of our places we have a manager that and there's so much with trust in this, and we've had our trust broken for sure. We several years ago had this was when in Musana, when we were just doing Musana, we had our accountant in Uganda get a hold of our credit card or our debit card, and right after Christmas sales, so our biggest sales of the year, he drained our bank account and took off. We never saw him again. And we all actually almost shut the operation down at that point. We were like, we have no money to pay our artisans, and that's what we're trying to do here. But we've learned, so both for our trust and their trust, so we've learned how, like, some accountability with multiple people being on the account to have like understanding of what's happening with the money. And on their side, this is something, so we work with these established groups. So a lot of times, like, the group leader will be literate, and we'll be kind of running the group. And for example, in Rwanda, we were working with, we did an order of 48,000 baskets at one point. And so we were working with over 1,000 artisans. And we were working with 10 cooperatives that already existed, and they each had leadership. And so we had like a spec sheet that had exactly the size, and it was this very traditional basket that we were doing that they all knew how to do. But like, this is the size we need, these are the colors, this is what we're gonna look for in quality control. And so once they understood what we were asking, they said, okay, we'll charge you this much. And we had done the research to understand how long it takes to make a basket and how much someone should make in a day. And so we had kind of done that math beforehand. And so they proposed the price, and we were like, that's way too low. And they were like, huh? They were probably like, you stupid Americans. You're bartering up. But then we do explain, like, we have to be careful not to pay too much to like disrupt the market and like cause weird dynamics. But we do pay fairly, and so we do those arithmetic to understand how much we should be paying and what is fair and what would make sense, and still allow them to send their kids to school and have good, nutritious food, etc. So yeah, there's a lot of these things that we've learned, and luckily we learned it through, we learned a lot of these things through our nonprofit, and then we were able to start our for-profit with a lot more understanding of these dynamics. Like, we knew what was going to come at us, and so kind of putting these structures in place to allow us to trust each other. So, great question. Yeah.
Was it difficult to work with or did you have to work with the governments of each of these companies? I mean, each of these countries, going in, doing international business. I feel like you have to also understand, having to work with their business laws as opposed to or I don't know, was that like a difficulty?
That's a great question. So in the developing world, there's a lot less regulations, and there's a lot that they want to export. And so, for example, there's an agreement called AGOA. I can't remember what it stands for, AGOA, between Sub-Saharan Africa and, no, I believe it's all of Africa, because I think it applied in Morocco as well, where they have no export fees. And so they want to export so bad. So we've had to do some things with but again, we're way more regulated. So it's doing more things like how to import here, with the baskets, they had to make sure that there wasn't weevils in them and that they'd been aerated. And we have to have different certificates if we're importing leather, that it's been treated properly, and et cetera. So it's more US stuff. It's very often, and we're working in kind of a spectrum of development. Some are very developing to up and coming economies that have more regulations. They tend to have more regulations the more developed they can become. So we're kind of learning each time we figure that out. So it's interesting. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
What took you to Uganda to begin with? Why? How did this all start?
So it was a job. So it was got a stipend. It was going abroad, especially going abroad for your first few times. If people are interested in that, a lot of times you have to pay, originally to go. So I was able. In grad school, I did a project in China, so kind of got some experience there. But it was just after I graduated, I worked for this nonprofit. So I was coordinating the interns there. So there was college student interns in Uganda for the summer that we were working on some business stuff, education, health. So we're working on different community projects. So yeah, so it was just there, and then we just kind of saw the need, and then the solution was, we called it a nonprofit, but it was a business model from the beginning. We just didn't do great at it. But and that's just it. That, right? That's what starting a business is seeing a market need and then creating a solution. And so we didn't even know that that's what entrepreneurship was. We didn't know that that's what we were doing. We were just and many of these women had worked in so I mentioned that Eve would wash clothes for us. Some of the women had cooked for our group. And so they'd had this consistent work for 4 months that we'd been there. And then we're they're just going to go back to just their daily labor, trying to scrap for stuff. So we're let's start something. Let's do jewelry. Okay. Yeah. So that's how it all started. Yeah.
How much of your time and resources are spent on the production side versus the corporate sales side?
So basically, just for these really large orders, we go in country because there's so much with exporting and labeling and making sure there's, when we're doing huge numbers, we're there. But for the most part, it is probably, last year I spent 6 weeks in Uganda to get this done. But other than that, it's a lot of this just working on our corporate orders and working on reaching out to companies. So it's probably 60 or 70% corporate, and then 30-40% really doing the production in country. But it's all of our artisans that they're doing all of that all the time. So yeah.
How do you balance? You talked about the for-profit entity.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you balance obviously the goal to make a profit,
Mm-hmm.
the LLC is
Mm-hmm.
for-profit, versus running the nonprofit and ensuring that your artisans are paid well? How do you balance those two things, and how do they work together well?
Yeah, good question. So it is tricky. In general, balance I have not figured out. I just don't sleep very much, but I'm working on that. Work less is a goal, but as far as this balance, because it is this interesting relationship between the two, me and my business partner actually balance each other out a lot, because I'm more we gotta make sure Musana's taken care of, and she's well, if we get more orders, and if we we've got to treat them just like our other groups. And so we have done that, because it is the more orders we can get for them, the better that our nonprofit does. And so trying to like have the mentality that we need to treat them like our other groups. And then we have this incredible manager in Uganda. She's a Ugandan woman that has a university education. She's, speaks English better than I do. She's just this rock star. And so she really runs the day to day. And so we're just really doing the business side these days. There's some side things where we actually have a community library that we started so we've started meeting some needs of our community through some of our fundraising. We're starting a center for kids with disabilities next to our workshop. So we have some interesting that are very nonprofit-y going on. But anyways, she runs the day-to-day so that we can, and that's what I really figured out. I'm like, me being in Uganda, there's only so much I can do. I will never understand the dynamics like a local could. And so the best thing I can do is be here and be getting the orders. That's the best thing I can do for them. So really realizing that and embracing that. Yeah, yeah.
So, you talk about a lot of times the middleman making, a lot of money and that stuff. So how do you handle that and deal with that? You pay you give them a fair wage and all that stuff, but
yeah.
More
So yeah,
products that are then being sold at super upscale department stores and where's that?
Yeah, I mean hopefully this will answer your question. We realize that we are not competing against China-made products. So if people are we do have to, because we are paying more to the artisans, we need to charge more, for an ethical product. And luckily, again, the mentality in this generation is I will pay more to know that something is ethical and that has a story, so we really hone in on the storytelling aspect. And then just if people are oh, it's too expensive, we're okay, you can go get, a conveyor belt thing. This has a story and an impact that that's part of the value of this thing. So I think kind of really leaning into that we're not competing with, with conveyor belt things. And yeah, I mean, our artisans are, welcome being fairly paid. So that is not an issue. Competing with these more exploitive markets. So yeah, did that answer your question? Or what?
How much, what's the percentage between say what people get paid and then what it costs for you guys to do all the things that you do here?
Yeah.
And
Yes.
How much is too much? And,
Okay, so yes, so pricing, we just start with knowing, so when I described the Rwanda basket thing, we know how much materials cost, how long it takes to make that basket, and what would be a good daily wage, and above average daily wage. And so that's where we start, and then we add in what are going to be all of our hard costs for if we need to travel there, for packaging and printing the cards, etc., and then how much for our time. And so we just start with that. This is just on spreadsheets right now, and then build that out, and then that gives us bing, the pricing. And then we have our pricing definitely varies by quantity because it takes less of our time if we do a large quantity. And so so customers can know if we go over 1,000, we're gonna get a lower price, but then it still makes sense for us. So yeah, great question. Okay, we're over time.
We're probably out of time, so
Okay.
let me just say a couple things to finish up. Some of you might know Rich Christensen. He's super supportive of the program, and I asked him for some advice on who we should bring in this semester, and I said, because the schedule was pretty full, and I just said, who is the most interesting, entertaining speaker we can get? And so now you know who it is. And we would like to present her with the Cedar Award in recognition
Oh,
of her. Who we did.
cool.
So thank you.
That is so awesome. Great, thank you so much.
Thank you.